Well, good morning, Virginia. Or as my sisters and brothers in West Virginia say, good morning, East Virginia. I had a dickens of a time crossing that great moat called the Potomac River. And that is why I did it yesterday afternoon. Why would you want to leave Washington, D.C. on an afternoon, I don't know, to get to Virginia? But it's good to be in this state. It's an honor to be asked to be here today. Thank you, my friend Susan Goff, whom I met, was that about 57 years ago or so? Virginia Seminary, where she was training me, helped to train me to be a supervisor for seminarians. And I look forward to joining her in a year and a half in my own reducement. I've announced to the diocese last year I'll be stepping down in spring of 2024. I didn't have anything in mind after that, but since that time, the Holy Spirit opened a door, and so I will be starting actually this summer, but then full-time next year as the new senior pastor at the Chautauqua Institution in upstate New York. And I'm also pleased to be here with my friend Mark Stevenson. Mark, look at you, all grown up and stuff like that. You know, it's just marvelous and I look forward to working with you even more closely, the Diocese of Maryland with Virginia, on some common ministries, and we've already started talking about some things, even the possibility of doing some things more together in the area of creation care and trying to address issues of environmental degradation. I also want to let you all know that Diocese of Maryland, we are a bunch of givers. We just give. We gave you Mark Wassler down there at St. Paul's. We gave you Pierre-Henri Buisson. Where are you, Pierre-Henri? He's over there in Delaplane. But wait a minute, we gave you Jessica Holthus down there in Reston. We gave you Nick Zabota and Colonial Heights. We gave you Danielle Velez Rivera there at St. Gabriel's. And of course, you may remember that we gave you Bob Uloff as assisting bishop for a while. And right now, as I speak, I'm giving you my wife, Sonia Sabaya Sutton, working at the Falls Church there with Burl Salmon and his team. We're just a bunch of givers, and we haven't asked for anything in return. But reparations would be in order, I think, to Maryland for all that our poor diocese has done for y'all. But you're not a stranger to reparations. And so that's what I want to talk with you about today. Talk about racial reconciliation, putting back together again things which had been broken. I've been speaking a lot about that lately, actually across the nation in some dioceses, schools, other institutions, and testifying before Congress. And I'm reminded of what woman told me recently, Bishop Sutton, every one of your presentations is better than the next. That's the way we talk in Maryland. We talk like that. So we better pray about this thing. Let us pray to God for inspiration. Tell us what we need to hear, oh God, and show us. Show us what we need to do to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, y'all, race. Here's a conversation that almost all of us want to avoid, precisely because it's so difficult and ridden with many emotions, including sadness, grief, anxiety, anger, and hopelessness. I'm not going to try to overload you in this too brief time with more than you can handle in one presentation, but I do promise to give you some things that you can take home with you about where we are and how we can get to where we all want to be as Episcopalians, as Christians in race relations. And prepare yourself to get angry at me sometime in this talk, okay? Don't worry, you're supposed to get mad. So it's all going to be fine, all right? So, Meshach, Shadrach, and away we go. If you ask most Americans, are we as a nation better off now in race relations than we were at the time Martin Luther King died? The answer is sobering. On that, we are agreed. The Pew Research Center says a majority of Americans say race relations in the United States are bad. And of those, about 7 in 10 say things are getting even worse. Roughly 2/3 say it's become more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views in the last 5 years, even if not necessarily more acceptable. Significantly, even though there are some disparities, even most white persons don't feel good about where we are. If you ask a black person where I live in Baltimore, are we better off now since Martin Luther King? They would say, come on, man, please. They'd actually probably say it a little more expressively using an N-word. All of us thought we'd be much farther along than we are now, right? Y'all remember Woodstock? Anybody here Woodstock? Yeah, you're old. Love ends, peace and harmony, when the moon was in its 7th house, and Jupiter aligns with Mars. You know what? Then peace will guide the planets, and love will fill the sky. This is the dawning of the age. Okay, y'all can stop. Okay, that's right, Bishop. We got your demo tape. You can leave now. But you know, we're just not where we are. We thought it was going to be done, and a new age of harmony would be introduced. But large majorities of blacks and Hispanics and Asians say people not seeing discrimination where it exists is a bigger problem in the U.S. than people seeing it where it doesn't exist. But whites are evenly divided about that. It's hard to see racism when you're in a racist system. It's hard for a fish to know it's wet. We swim in an ocean of an ideology that we've all inherited. By some measures, we are in a better place. We've taken down the signs saying whites only and colored only. We've integrated all the water fountains and bathrooms, although there's still a problem with some swimming pools. Did you know that? And not all clubs are open either. More and more black Americans can purchase homes in more and more neighborhoods. We're on TV and movie a lot, and on advertisements. There have been significant strides in access to education and jobs. There are fewer instances of she or he is the first black person to, you fill in the blank. When I was elected in Maryland in 2008, I was elected on the first ballot. The previous bishop elected on the first ballot was Thomas Claggett, the first bishop of Maryland, the first consecrated. He was a slave owner. All the Anglican clergy were. And almost all of the early bishops, the second bishop of Maryland, technically didn't own slaves, but when we researched our history, the records show his wife owned them. And he did not. We know that history. I don't have to rehearse that here. If you don't know the history, why don't you? The history about clergy being paid in tobacco. And as long as tobacco was the payment and clergy were not likely to work the fields, they owned slaves for their livelihood. It was the system, you see. It didn't make any difference if they felt good toward those or had positive feelings or even thought they had souls. Not all white Christians thought that black people had souls at that time and were not worthy of hearing the gospel. They also suspected if you evangelize them, you're A, saying they're human beings, and that's a problem in a racist system. And two, it meant that they were your brothers and sisters. That's a problem. So it's the system. And ever since, we've always tried to make a distinction between a system for which you may be participating in, and you're saying, I'm not racist. That may be true in terms of bigotry, but you still benefit from a system. Well, there are numerous studies. Well, never mind. I don't for a moment want to minimize the very substantial gains in racial justice in the last 50 years. We can all celebrate the tremendous strides that have been made in racial attitudes in our nation. When I was elected in a diocese where 40 years before, I would not have been welcomed as a member in most of the parishes. That's a lot of change. A lot of change in 40 years. We're very proud of the accomplishments of the many black individuals who have overcome great odds to achieve success. But for the millions of descendants of slaves who are trapped in a pernicious cycle of hopelessness, poverty, and rage, due to their real experiences of racial segregation, redlining, inferior schools, substandard housing, and lack of health care, and the like. The widespread assumption that everyone and anyone can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps if only they tried is a lie. It's a lie. They know that the odds are against them on so many fronts. They cannot change their environment. They cannot change the color of their beautiful dark skins. These days, it certainly doesn't feel that we are closer to being a more racially harmonious society than we were 50 years ago. You know some of the discouraging statistics. If you don't, why don't you? Beginning with criminal justice, African Americans comprise only 13% of the US population and only estimated 14% of monthly drug users. But 37% of the people arrested for drug-related causes are African American. Studies show that police are more likely to pull over and frisk blacks or Latinos than whites. I've had my share of it, even as bishop. In New York City alone, 80% of the stops made were for blacks and Latinos, and 85% of those people were frisked, compared to only 8% chance if you're pulled over and you're white. You will not be frisked. Black men are 2.5 more times more likely to be killed by police than white men. In 2010, the U.S. Sentencing Commission reported that African Americans received 10% longer sentences than whites through the federal system for the same crimes. African Americans are 21% more likely than whites to receive mandatory minimum sentences. They are 20% more likely to be sentenced to prison than white defendants, white drug defendants. Black Americans are almost twice as likely as white Americans to lack health insurance, making it difficult to receive proper care. In schools, black students face disproportionate suspension rates. Black girls often receive more severe penalties for the same behaviors as their white peers. Most studies say they are nearly 6 times more often to get out-of-school suspensions. Graduation gaps also exist. I won't go into the statistics there. Disparities continue in the workforce. Black people have a higher unemployment rate than average. They are often left out of high-paying jobs. Black ownership rates remain the lowest in the US. Only 44% of black households own their own homes, compared to 74% of white households. The black poverty rate is double the white rate. Perhaps most importantly, 1 in 3 black families have 0 or negative wealth. Wealth, for most Americans, comes from accumulated assets, financial, educational, cultural, social, and otherwise, that have been handed down through the generations. Many white persons believe, oh, I did this all on my own, all through my own efforts, but discounting all of the assets, including where you live, that have been handed down. The lack of black wealth is a significant problem in the social problems we have today. And finally, in a sobering statistic of how most white Americans have responded to these statistics, well, 51% in one research poll of Americans expressed anti-black sentiments in a poll. That's been up 3% since 2008. More anti-black sentiments. I'm reminded of that seminal book by William Ryan in 1976, Blaming the Victim on the Psychology of Bias. It's alive and well in our nation today. Put shortly, if you put your knee on someone's neck for, say, 350 years, and then you let go of the knee, if they're able to stand on their own, that's okay, but if they can't, you blame them, not your knee. They are at fault. There are numerous studies showing hidden implicit bias in some amount in all of us, especially those who say, I don't see color, and I don't have a racist bone in my body. The statistics will show you're wrong. Robert P. Jones, a Christian sociologist, whom maybe, Mark, you can have speak here at some point. We're trying to get him to speak at the General Convention. Raised Southern Baptist, went to Southwest Baptist Seminary. He's a pastor. He's done numerous studies. Then here's the outcome. The more religious an American says that she or he is, the more racist they are. He can correlate church going. The more the person goes to church, the more racist they become. How about that? And I remember there was a presentation he gave at the Chautauqua Institution this past summer. And you could see, even though here's a man of faith, and he says, my Sunday school teachers, my civics people, my family, extended family, they all lied to me. They lied to him about how deeply inequitable and racist the system is. And what we as Episcopalians need to help people to understand is, if you come to our church and you come regularly to our church, will we successfully try to uncover the hidden bias that's in everything we do? As a young man in college, I kept hearing, young people today are growing up in a less racist, multiracial, and multicultural world, and they get it. So racism will practically be dead in a generation, or maybe 2 at most. Well, it's been almost 3 generations since King, and here we are. Are we doomed to live in racial strife, mistrust, and conflict? If that's true, then why? And if so, how do we fix it? 4 ways to fix it. I'm just going to briefly talk about 3, but spend a little more time on the 4th. First, we need to commit ourselves to having civil conversations about race and, frankly, about anything. Civil congregations, and making that possible. 2, we need to remind ourselves that social critique of our nation and honest critique of our church is healthy, and in terms of the nation, it's patriotic. Patriotic. Our founding fathers of this nation would be appalled if they heard people say, don't criticize it. If you want to criticize this nation, go elsewhere. They would say, no, that's not what we had in mind. Critique, and even the critique of this nation on our racist attitudes, and critique of our church, and critique of our families and schools and institutions is part of the way to change. If you don't critique, it perpetuates. 3, we need people of courage to call out the perniciousness of racist language whenever we encounter it. We are all susceptible and guilty of using insensitive language. Lord knows sometimes I put my foot in my mouth about various things. You have too. And as I said earlier, we all swim in the ocean of racism in this country. I remember, I don't know if you remember, our former president, President Trump. He slurred my city some years ago, called Baltimore vermin infested. And we know the history of that. When you associate a people with vermin, Hitler really had a field day with that on the Jews. And of course, there are rats in Baltimore. There are rats in Washington. There are rats in the White House. Did you know that? And I mean real ones. I remember reading stories of Barbara Bush swimming in the White House swimming pool, and there was a rat right in there. But we know what he was trying to do. I wrote him a letter. I wrote President Trump a letter that was signed unanimously by every major Christian leader in Maryland, saying this is a major city, and you are our president, and you are slurring your people. And we invited him to come to Baltimore and see all the good things that we're trying to do there and are succeeding at in many ways. I never received an answer. So those 3 things we need to practice, but here's the 4th. We need to repay the debt, long overdue, that this nation has owed for almost 400 years of slavery and racial oppression. Here's a key statistic why it's so important in order to achieve a better state of race relations than we are currently in. Despite their generally negative assessments of the current state of race relations, Americans tend to say that most racial and ethnic groups get along pretty well together as a group. Among those who gave an answer in this poll, about 6 in 10 say this is the case between whites and Asians. 88% say that whites and Asians get along pretty well. Hispanics and Asians, 7 in 10. Blacks and Hispanics. Whites and Hispanics. Blacks and Asians. Overwhelmingly, people say, oh, they get along pretty well. but assessments of how well blacks and whites get along are much lower on both sides. About 6 in 10 whites say blacks and whites just don't get along very well at all. The question is why? What's the problem between white Americans and black Americans? I don't know, let me think. You know the answer. Because of this thing that we've had since 1619, when white persons began importing and enslaving people of African descent. Now, it was a trade. Some blacks also enslaved blacks. We know that. They learned from the Europeans. So for 250 years, beginning in 1619, the enslavement happened. And then the Civil War. This is a dangerous thing to say for some in Virginia. I am so glad the Confederacy lost. I wish that many sadly, not all Americans are glad that the Confederacy lost. And we're still fighting the Civil War. But for the next 110 years or so since the end of slavery until, say, the end of the Civil Rights era around 1970, the white majority have made it nearly impossible for most black people to get good jobs, good housing, good education, good health care, even by the law. And where was the church in this? The church blessed it. The Episcopal Church blessed it. Even more so than others, we began it in the 17th century. This 350-year period of overt, constant, and pervasive oppression has left a scar. Not just on black persons, but on the souls of white persons. A scar. This nation has never, as a nation, apologized for this 4 centuries of monstrous conduct. Look it up. There hasn't been the apology. The House of Representatives some years ago made one, not the Senate and not the presidents. It has never made a single attempt to actually repay the black community for what it stole from them. But even before the end of slavery, there were voices in this nation, not just black voices like Frederick Douglass, but many white voices that said, when the slaves are free, what are they going to be freed for? What do they have? We took everything. And there were even proposals for restitution. You've heard of 40 acres and a mule. That live proposal was put on the desk of Abraham Lincoln, who was trying to figure out how to do it, when a man named John Wilkes Booth put an end to that. And he shot him. And then the vice president was an adamant Southern segregationist. And so that proposal went off the table. How might it have been different? How might it have been different if that reparation were paid then in this nation? We'd be much better off. Reparations were paid, by the way, yes, to several slave owners who were repaid for the monies they lost during the Civil War. But you know, I learned something in Sunday school a long time ago, that if you stole something from someone, the right thing to do is to pay it back or to make restitution. The United States of America stole from my people and enriched itself. I am both a beneficiary and, if you will, a victim of racism. The beneficiary is a good part of my compensation comes on the back of my African American forebears who were enslaved. That leaves a scar, and it makes us all crazy. We still benefit from slavery, but I know a way out. I know a solution, and it's not mine. It's been kicked around for years. Start to pay it back. Just do the right thing. What about forgiveness? Some would say, I'm all for it. In fact, most Black Americans have forgiven this nation a long time ago. We have. We're here. We're patriotic. We've even fought for this nation. A new movie is coming out just today about a Black airman who fought for this nation, and this nation would not fight for him. And by the way, don't ever criticize a Black person in this nation as being unpatriotic. When we criticize, especially when we criticize and protest in America the ways that we can, I don't know why it made so many people crazy when some Black athletes knelt during the national anthem. Especially we as Episcopalians, we should know, not many of you in Virginia are Anglo-Catholic. But my knees have been ruined from years of Anglo-Catholicism. Kneeling is not a sign of disrespect, only if politicians say it is and make you all crazy. Descendants of slaves, and this may surprise you, are the most loyal Americans you will ever find. It's just that we love America enough to criticize it. We're not leaving. I know someone say, oh, if you don't like it here, just go somewhere else. We're not leaving. You go back. When white Europeans start going back, okay, we'll hear you. And even then, we still may follow you and say, but what about the debt? You can go to Sweden. You're going to find Black people there. You can go all around the world like Europeans did 400 or 500 years ago and find out that nobody else around the world looks like us. But we have an idea, maybe based on fear, they're all not like us. But this color skin gives us a leg up. If we have armaments and we can colonize all of them, we can readily identify who they are, and they are not us. Well, no, we aim to stick around, and we're going to make you squirm as much as we possibly can. We're going to try to make you squirm until America lives up to her soaring creeds about freedom and justice for all. And we aim increasingly to make this sturdy, good church of ours, the Episcopal Church, squirm as much as possible until it does the right thing. And by the way, you're welcome. You're welcome. So the word we use to make restitution, to fix the problem, is the R word. Yes, reparations. Don't let that word scare you. And I know it hasn't. This diocese did an amazing thing last year. And you voted on that principle. You voted for $10 million to be raised over 5 years. You can't repay all the debt. We know that. But what a statement. You know, we in poor Maryland, we thought we were all right doing $1 million in 2019. But we've since added to that through fundraising and other things. And just last week, our convention voted to continue funding it at least at $100,000 pace all the time through perpetuity. You've taken a great step on that. And I know it's costly. It really is. And it should cost. Maybe some things in Christian education won't happen in terms of printing materials and retreats and all that. But how about this for Christian education? Show your kids that you are doing honorable things. Teach them about reparations. That's one of the best Christian formation things you can tell them. You're making amends. Amends. That's faith formation. In a word, that word reparations means quite simply to repair that which has been broken. It's not just about monetary compensation. It's the beginning of a conversation. But it's not less than about money. Everybody agrees on a whole lot of things until you start putting money to it. And I was so disturbed some years ago when some otherwise well-meaning people in our diocese are saying, well, you know, Bishop, you can't just throw money at the problem. And I'm thinking, you know, my diocese, you know, we have some really good Episcopal schools. One of them, St. Paul's School for Boys and Girls, you know, they have millions and millions of dollars in endowment. Great facilities and all that. But in all my years, I never heard someone say, oh, they're just throwing money at the kids. No, you only throw money at the poor. You only throw money at black and brown people. It's like throwing shoes. Throwing paper towels. I mean, that's an insult. It's an insult. And for whatever reason, political and others, there are good reasons to be Republicans, good reasons to be Democrats. Some of my friends are for the Republican Party. Some of my friends are for the Democratic Party. And I'm for my friends. But for those, especially those who supported Donald Trump, where was your voice when he was shouting out all this racist stuff? Speak up and say, that's wrong. That's wrong. An act of reparations is an attempt to make whole again, to restore, to offer atonement, to make amends, to reconcile a wrong or an injury. And so just in 3 minutes, 4 minutes, I just want to say a few things about what reparations is not, to dispel some other lingering questions about it. And then we're going to show a video of how we got there in Maryland. And that may answer many of your questions. First, reparations is not throwing money at the problem of racism. No, it's an emotionally healthy effort to repair a broken system. And some of that effort involves money, but it's not all about money. But if it's less than money, you're doing what many Christians have done for centuries. They never put their money where their mouth is. Oh, we believe in the dignity of every human being, but it shouldn't really cost us anything. And oh, you know, we're all forgiven. We've been forgiven. We're forgiving the past. But you know, forgiveness is just the first step in reconciliation. Black and white people, as I said earlier, we've forgiven you. That doesn't mean we're reconciled. Reconciliation means you got to put something down to say this was wrong, and here we go. Second, reparations is not a transfer of money from white people to black people. No. It's what this generation does to repair what we've been handed down from previous generations. It doesn't make any difference if your ancestors came over on the Mayflower or on a slave ship, or they came in the 19th century or the early 20th century and had nothing to do with slavery, or if you're a recent immigrant. We are all in the same boat. We're all in the system. It is not about guilt. It's about responsibility. Maybe this generation will take responsibility for fixing it and not leaving that can on the road of reparations that previous generations have just kicked down the road. Guess what? That can is still on the road. And we're going to take responsibility. And Diocese of Virginia is going to help lead the way on taking responsibility. And then fourth, By the way, when I said it's not transfer of money from white people to black people, I mean it's not individual checks to black persons. That's a common misconception that some groups and people deliberately put out there so that they want to convince you that no money should be paid. Oh, they just want guilt money from you. And by the way, black people just want you to write them a check. Makes me crazy. We don't want a check. We want something that's going to make an impact. In the Diocese of Maryland, we gave our reparations group 5 areas. We want you to fund initiatives in the impoverished black community in these 5 areas. Education. We're doing that in Baltimore, a program called the Sutton Scholars Program. I didn't name it. They named it after me. They knew I'd raise money for it. But we take hundreds, over the years, we've taken hundreds of high schoolers in inner city Baltimore, the diocese had, and we committed ourselves to them for their 4 years of high school, teaching them life skills, social skills, any way we can to help them get over the hump. These kids are not going to Ivy League schools. That's for others who've had more advantages and are prepared. But in our first class, 100% of them were going to college, and we helped them. We helped them. So, education, health care, and elder care. Health care, elder care. Third, environmental degradation, especially in the most impoverished areas. Fourth, economic development. Anything that creates jobs. And there is a fifth. I know, we're Episcopalians, there's always a fifth. Education, health care, it'll come to me. I had to jump around. You'll get it before the end. So lastly, before we see the video, reparations is not financial assistance. Please, it is not. It is not outreach. It is not charity. It is not a gift out of the goodness of our hearts. No, it's the payment of a debt. It's about justice. And when we gave monies to these groups, I made a big point that says, yeah, I know you're grateful. You should have seen the tears in their eyes of some of these community groups that received checks from the Episcopal Church. They had tears in their eyes. They said, we never thought that this white church would do that. We never thought that they would take responsibility. And we never thought that they would actually invest in the impoverished black community rather than take resources and churches out of the impoverished black community. That payment of this debt should cost every single American because we are all complicit and we play a role in this system we've inherited. I now want to show you a video in this time, and I'll just say a few sentences following, a video of how we got there in Maryland.
Hi, I'm the Reverend Joe Zollicoffer. I'm the rector here at Holy Trinity Episcopal Church in Churchville, Maryland. And when I was called to this parish in 2019, I learned of a program that this church was doing to uncover their history, and in particular, Rose Kane and her story. It appears that Rose was a domestic servant of the Cole family, a family local to this area. And when she passed away in 1951, the rector here, my predecessor, was a segregationalist. And he decided that she should not be buried in the church cemetery proper, that she should be outside the bounds of the cemetery. So that's where she was buried, and in fact there was a fence placed there to have a physical barrier between her and this parish. So when I learned of that story, I was enthusiastic that we should include Rose and her story in placing her back where she belongs as part of this family of Holy Trinity, as officially being within the bounds of the cemetery, of righting that wrong. That is exciting for me as a priest in the Episcopal Church, that we are willing to do this work. There are sins that our churches have done that we must repent and seek repentance and seek restoration and reconciliation. And I'm excited that we are doing that not only in our diocese, but as a people.
I'm going to read a resolution from Convention of the Diocese of Maryland in 2007 on the apology for slavery. Resolved that the 223rd Convention of the Diocese of Maryland, meeting May 4th and 5th, 2007, apologizes for the role of the Anglican Church in colonial America and of the Episcopal Church in the state of Maryland in the slavery of African Americans and in the subsequent racial injustice.
We began before most dioceses. We began immediately at our diocesan convention. We set up a committee to study this, to begin dialogues within the diocese about our racial history.
We had an anti-racism committee, and we had our reparations commissions as well. When I came, I combined them both because they are related, and it's hard to have one group of people doing anti-racism work and another talking about reparations. And so we combined the two committees and we called them the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Here's the significance of the name. Most people, all but a few people, really want reconciliation. The problem is that most people don't want to do the work. And that work of reconciliation begins in speaking the truth, telling the truth, finding out about the truth, exploring the truth, researching the truth. But you can't get to reconciliation until you first know what the truth of your history has been.
Truth is at the very heart of Christian faith. Without truth, we really can't move forward. And so our lives should be trying to discover the truth instead of trying to bury it.
In this diocese, what we began was the Trail of Souls pilgrimages.
The idea for the Trail of Souls came up, which I thought, wow, this is like really great.
November 1, 2015, we had a caravan of buses.
We started here at the cathedral and talked about some of the history and things that happened there.
We went to Southern Maryland, other places, to have people tell their stories. What did you find about your church's history?
We were lucky that the persons at the church who worked on the history were excited, some reluctant, but once they started working on their history, then it was like very real for them, and they just went at it, so that was good.
The archives was one place that was used because we have records here that can certainly aid in that discovery. I saw people who, even when they were reading the information, say, that can't be true. In 1840, when Bishop Whittingham became diocesan, he sent out a survey to every parish in the diocese with 4 pages of questions. And one of the questions was, do you do anything specific for the servants in your congregation? Which he always used that euphemism. He never used the word slave. Where do they sit in church? Do you have a gallery? Do you catechize the children? One parish had sent 3 researchers to look into their past, and they were looking at that document, and the priest had answered, we have a gallery for the servants. And she just said, that's not right. It wasn't used for slaves. It was used, they brought prisoners from the county jail. So She never did buy into that truth, even though it was written right there in black and white.
I think it's been very helpful to go to places like All Saints Church in Sunderland, where the balcony is so high that if you sit down, you cannot see and you cannot see over. It clearly was a slave balcony, and it's on 3 sides of the church.
The slave galleries themselves, and they are a prominent feature when you come in, and you're tempted to call them balconies, but they were the galleries, and their intent was to hold the slaves. Also, freemen were there, non-landed whites, and members of the indigenous population. But primarily it was slaves that were escorted there.
They were herded up a very narrow staircase in the front of the church, so their masters could be sure that they were actually going up there and not coming down again, because the stairwell can be seen from the nave of the church. So they were stuck up there to experience Episcopal worship without being able to see it. They could hear it. So even in church, they were slaves.
And the tobacco leaf essentially was the currency here. If you look at our seating chart from 1774, everyone who lived in the parish, all of the landowners, had to pay each year a 40-pound tax. 40 pounds of tobacco were paid to the parish. And additionally, the choice seats in this place were auctioned off. And again, that was in tobacco.
Clergy were paid by tobacco. Most parishes owned a glebe, which is a piece of land in which they could grow tobacco. And the money from it would pay the clergyman, upkeep the building. The parishes in this diocese, which were formed before the Civil War, every one of them benefited from slavery.
The economy in Western Maryland was different from the Southern Maryland economy that was very dependent on enslaved labor. The industrial slavery that existed is different from the slavery of Southern Maryland, but it's very much a part of the history here. The African American Cemetery at Catoctin, based on our research, contains the remains of people, all of whom were enslaved. Here at the Museum of the Ironworker, we realized that the visitor would perhaps sort of understand more of the humanity of the enslaved through the art and science of forensic facial reconstructions. So we got a grant, and we chose a 35-year-old mother and a 15-year-old young man. When visitors come, they don't just hear about industrial slavery or hear about individuals or read their names, but they're able to actually look into their eyes and see, see the people, see the enslaved who were here at Catoctin.
I had nothing to do with slavery, you hear that. My people didn't enslave anybody. I didn't cause this mess. And you know what? You're exactly right. You didn't cause it. I didn't cause it either. Our generation did not cause the mess we're in, but we're all in the same boat now. The thing is, it's not about guilt, it's about responsibility. What can we, all of us, white and black, descendants of slave owners and descendants of enslaved persons, whether you're a recent immigrant or been here for generations, we're all swimming in this ocean of racism with a debt on the table.
Reverend Natalie Conway is the deacon at the Memorial Episcopal Church in Bolton Hill. But on this day, she recounted finding out that her great-great-grandmother, Harriet Cromwell, was enslaved here at the Hampton National Historic Site, formerly Hampton Plantation in Towson, off of Delaney Valley Road.
It was a shock, because even though you deal with slavery and you deal with subtle racism, to have it actually slap you in the face is a whole nother story. And just trying to deal with that, knowing that somebody a couple of generations ago was actually here and working, slaving in some capacity with no freedoms was said.
My congregation, Memorial Episcopal Church in Baltimore, there were two big plaques in the back, and one of them was in honor of the founding rector, Charles Ridgely Howard. And I had looked at that plaque a million times and knew that I was somehow connected, but never really looked closely into exactly how. And then when Natalie told her story about her family having been enslaved at the Hampton Plantation, I had to say, you know, I'm connected to the other side of that story. It really felt like humanizing the issue for the first time. I think a lot of white people, myself included, always thought of slavery as done, history book is closed, don't reopen it. To the people who say now is not a good time to talk about racism, I agree with you. The right time to talk about racism and slavery was 1619. And every year for the next 403 years, it's gotten to be a worse time to talk about it.
I really felt that really needed some healing. I had consulted someone about doing this libation service.
Natalie had already pretty much organized the trip to Hampton Plantation, and the ability for Natalie and I to pour water on that ground together made an enormous difference and was an enormous change.
And it was also not only a healing, I think, for us, but it was a healing for the 50 people that were with us.
We know that there's a benefit from having white skin. No need to feel sorry about that. I want everybody to feel good about their skin. I want white people to feel good about being white. I want black and brown people to feel good about being black and brown. Let's all feel good about that. But there's a benefit that comes from white skin, and that has to be acknowledged. Denial of it is just another denial from hundreds of years of denials. So if this is not the time because, we got a pandemic, we got other things going on, okay, you tell me, when is the best time for justice?
It only takes one person to be the spur to do this. One person who is determined to dig out the truth and look at it squarely in the face in each parish can make a huge difference. In all the parishes that I have been to, that I've helped, every one of them presented programs on what they have found. They have owned the past.
You know, it's not something to be swept under the rug. It's something to be examined. It's something to be looked at, to say to each other, I understand now.
We want to be real, you know. We want to be real to ourselves and real to others. We have cornered ourselves, and surrounded ourselves with right liturgy and good doctrine and sound theology. Well, the rest of the world doesn't care. What they're looking for are real people to join them in a real struggle, to find real solutions, and to really create the kingdom of God.
I'm also hoping more and more that when people encounter the phrase, Episcopal Church, I want the first thing they think about is this: wow, there's a community of love. Those are people who put their money where their mouth is. They're talking about race, and that's not tearing them apart. I want people to say, man, the Episcopal Church, what a diverse group of people who really love one another. But more than that, they love people who are not Episcopalians, and they're always reaching out, seeing what they can do to spread the love of God everywhere, spiritually and materially. That would be my hope.
And then the next annual convention, we voted on the sum of establishing a seed fund of $1 million. It's more than that now, not because of the stock market, as we all know, but because of continuing contributions to that fund of people from all over the state, Episcopalian or non-Episcopalian, saying, we want to be a part of this.
So, my friends, we can do this. The Diocese of Maryland could do it. This 95% white diocese, including from Appalachia. By the way, one of the biggest checks I got for reparations came from descendants of coal miners in Western Maryland. They got it. If we can do it, then the Episcopal Church can do it. And we can help lead the way. Maybe once again, the faith community can lead the way, just as we did in the civil rights movement. We can lead the way on this issue. Thank you all very much. God bless.